Welcome back to the Urban Elements studio. If you noticed in the intro, we don't have a quilt loaded on the frame today, so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about how we measure the backing of the quilt, as well as the batting of the quilt, because I think I do that a little different than some people do. And we're going to talk about why we measure the backing the way that we do. And then we're going to go ahead and get the backing, batting, and top loaded. The top that I'm going to load today is called a decoupage quilt, and I got this particular kit from Jordan Fabrics, and the reason I got it was because my mom loves roses, and also I always think of my mom when I think about roses, and this has a lot of roses in it. My mom grew up on the side of the mountains in Tennessee. There wasn't actually a street address there because there was no street. You would go down the railroad tracks and cross the trestle, and they lived on the side of the mountain. And I remember when we went to visit that spot when I was a kid, we had crossed the railroad tracks, and I have a fear of heights. And the trestle, the wood was kind of far apart, and I was crawling on my hands and knees to get across them, and I had creosote all over my pants from that. But when we got over there, all that was left of the homestead was old briar rose. And so when I think about my mom's side of the family, I always think about roses. So that whole side of the family is symbolically a rose for me. So I'm going to be putting this on the frame, and as I said, it's got a lot of roses in it. So that's the theme of the day. Traditionally, lately, I've been using wide backings because they're so much easier to deal with. There's not a lot of cutting or figuring. You can just cut them down generally to fit the size of your quilt. But because this fabric line had a very specific fabric that matched it, and it was not 108-inch fabric, I'm going to go ahead and use 45-inch goods. So I have to use 3 45-inch width fabric to equal the size that I need for this particular quilt. So we're going to measure the quilt, and then we're going to add a total of 7 inches on each side. I really only need about 6, but I'm going to give myself an extra inch. And when I get the quilt loaded and we can do a measurement, I will show you why I'm adding that 6 inches on the two sides. As far as the top and bottom, I need at least 3 or 4 inches at the top, and I need about 3 or 4 inches at the bottom as well. So I don't have to add that 14 inches that I added on the side, as long as I know which is going to be the top and bottom. The reason we're adding this extra width is basically because of how we attach the backing to the quilt frame. We don't want the sewing machine head to ever get close to anything that we're attaching the quilt to the frame with. Whether we use snaps, zippers, or pins, there are going to be times when we're not looking at the edge of the quilt while we're sewing, and we don't want the head of this machine to sew over any of those things while we're sewing, whether it be for a tearaway, paper pantos, design boards, free motion quilting, or digital quilting. If you run over a needle, a pin, or a zipper, or a clip, you're going to certainly break a needle, but you also may really knock the timing out on your machine. In my particular case, if the timing is knocked out on my machine, I have to have it taken in for service. My local service center is over an hour away in another state. I also have to disassemble 2 of the bars on the frame to get the machine off, and I have to unscrew it from the carriage, and it's very hard to center it back on the carriage when I get it back, and I have to get it back on to the motors of the IQ. So it's a pretty big ordeal, and that's why we want to allow extra room. So when I say that we want the backing to be larger, it's not for you personally as the quilter necessarily, it's for the long armor. And if you don't do it for the long armor, they may give you the quilt back and refuse to do it, or they may add more to the backing themselves and charge you for it. So either way, you're going to want to provide that extra width for them. It doesn't necessarily have to be the backing fabric on the two edges. It could be scrap, but it does have to be on equal sides so that they can get it on the frame without having any issue. If they don't need it as much, they could always trim a little away. But if they have to add it, they're going to charge you most likely. So we're going to go ahead and measure this first and see what our width and length are, and then we're going to talk about the width and length we need for the backing. I have one long continuous piece for the rose fabric. I think I got 10 yards or thereabouts. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut the 3 lengths I need and iron those and seam them together, and we'll get started. Down here I don't have a flat space big enough to lay the quilt flat. So all I do is lay the quilt over the bar in the front, and I'm laying it right over in the center, and I can tell that because of the center of the center block and the points on the end. That was the design of this particular quilt. So I can just measure straight across here and get my measurement for the width, and then I can turn this the other way and do the same thing for the length. That way I don't have to lay the entire quilt out. And usually getting the measurement from the center of the quilt gives you a much more accurate measurement of the quilt anyway. But I'm going to be adding on extra length anyway, so it doesn't have to be super exact. This isn't like we're cutting the border right now. So after I get those measurements, then I can go over to the table and calculate the backing and batting that I need. This is basically the size of my quilt. It's 105 by 89. The 105 is the length and the width is 89. So what I'm going to do on the length, I don't need to add as much because I have the leaders, and the leaders extend the reach of the fabric a little bit, and I don't have to worry about that as much because the way that the machine is designed, it won't get in the way the same way the sides do. On the side, I need to add 14 inches, so I'm adding 7 for each side. I'll explain that when we get to it. And so 89 plus 14 gives me 103, and 105 plus 8 gives me 113. So I'm going to do, on my backing fabric, I'm going to do 3 strips sewn together, and it's going to be 103 for each strip wide, and each of them are going to be approximately somewhere between 40 and 45 inches. Either way, I'm going to have plenty of fabric there. And this is exactly the way I'm going to attach it to the frame so that these seams are running this way. The selvage is made to be super tight on the edges of the fabric, and that's purposeful so that the fabric doesn't unravel, or so it doesn't fray. But if you leave those in there, they are so strong that it doesn't allow the fabric to stretch the way all of the other fabric in the quilt does. Generally, when I seam these together, I cut that selvage off so it's not so tight. But still, the straight of grain here is very tight. It has very little give. So if I do it this way, I find I have less trouble than I do if I run the straight of grain down this way. So this is how it will be left on the quilt. I may leave the top and bottom selvage on because those are really nice to attach to the leader. It gives you a really nice strong connection. I'm also going to do the batting the exact same size as I cut my backing. And I know a lot of people just go ahead and cut it about the same size as their top and leave all that space, just the backing. But as the quilt rolls up with just the top and the batting, this space on the sides has no thickness to it. And as this thickness rolls up, this becomes all slack on the sides, and it kind of messes with the tension, and you start getting sag on both sides, and I find that it gives you really poor tension on these two sides. So I find if the batting goes all the way out to the edge, the thickness from the roll-up is the same all the way across the bar, and that way you don't get any sag. It's even, and you get a much better tension all the way down. That's just the way I do it. And then I go ahead and save those batting scraps, and I take them to the guild and I let other people use them. If you don't want to do that, you could always save scraps of batting and just feed them in there as you roll it up, and you could achieve the same thing. But I just always go ahead and cut the batting the size of the backing. You can see this is the backing fabric. It certainly goes with this particular line of fabric, and that's why I went ahead and decided to go ahead and piece the backing, because it matches so well. So I have my 3 pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and take the time to iron these, because I want them to be the exact perfect size. So I'll go ahead and do these one at a time. Once I get them ironed, I'm going to go ahead and pin them together, make sure we get really smooth joins, and then I'll sew them in nice even rows and get that part finished. I have my first 2 widths done, and what I like to do is this particular fabric had printing on the selvage on one side and the other side was blank. So I know that if I match a blank side with a printed side, that I will have the print going in the same direction all the way across. So that's what I've done. I have a blank side and a printed side here. And with a strip this long, what I like to do is I'm going to iron these 2 fabrics one on top of the other to kind of help them stick together, but also to make sure that I'm getting them both perfectly flat, and then I can go ahead and also put some pins in it to make sure that I'm not going to get some puckering on the machine, because the machine, I don't have a dual action top, or I'm not using a walking foot here, and if you're not careful, because the walking feet are feeding more vigorously than the foot is designed to let fabric slide through, you can end up with a little bit of a ruffling action, and I don't want there to be any puckering in the backing. So this ironing them together, make sure that they're perfectly flat, and doing some pinning can help prevent that. So I'm going to iron them smooth together and do some pinning as I go to make sure that we are getting a really flat connection and seam as I sew these through the machine. And also I don't use the foot on the edge of the fabric itself. I take the foot, and I use my 1/4 inch foot, but I take it all the way over to the edge of the white selvage. Now there's a thick part of the selvage, about a 1/2 inch, and then there's another 1/2 inch where it's regular fabric. It's not as thick, but it's still printed white. I use that white as the edge of where I line up my walking foot. And then when I'm done, and one side is wider than the other, and I use the wide side on the top. So when I'm done, I'll use that seam, and I'll go back a 1/2 inch, and I'll trim off that heavy selvage, and that way it won't be so stiff as it goes across the machine, and I won't have that heavy resistance. Okay, I know I have a really close-up view of my presser foot here, but you can see this is the edge of my fabric, this is the edge directly between the selvage and the printed fabric, and this is the edge of my foot. So what I'm going to do is put the edge of my foot right between the line of the printed fabric and the selvage, and you can see I have my pin in here, and I've ironed these and pinned them, and I'm going to you know what always happens? Machine hasn't been coming unthreaded at all, and today it came unthreaded. Head over. I'm going to do a little back stitch just because it's the edge, and then I'm going to just sew right along the edge between the selvage and the printed fabric with the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. And then when I get done all the way down, I will trim a 1/2 inch away from the seam, which is still a clear distance away from the actual thick part of the selvage. As I said, I have cut a 1/2 inch away from my seam line. So I've cut away basically all of the really stiff edge of the selvage. As I said before, that selvage is meant to keep the fabric edges from unraveling. So it's meant to be very stiff, but we don't need that in the body of the quilt. So all of this that I have here is soft, and I'm first ironing the seam just to set the seam. Then what I'm going to do is just press it to one side. Doesn't matter which side, as it is the back of the quilt. I know some people like to open up the seam on their backing if they have to seam two pieces together, and you have basically just the stitching in between those two pieces of folded fabric. But if by chance you have sewing from the quilting process going over those stitches, you're really damaging that stitching line, and you could have a situation where those two seamed pieces of fabric might separate. So I would rather just have the fabric folded to one side, in which case you know that's not possible, and because this is so soft anyway, it's not really going to create any bulk that is noticeable. Certainly if you happen to have a double bat or a thick bat, it's really not going to be noticeable. The thinner the bat, you might notice a little bit, but not with a double bat or with a thicker bat. And because I'm in the northeast, I tend to like a little bit thicker quilts anyway. In fact, I have a roll each of the Deluxe and a roll of the Supreme batting because I really like a nice thick batting. And so I probably will use either one of those for this particular quilt for that very reason. I like the weight of it too. It makes the quilt a little bit heavier, gives it a little bit more body. Now that I've ironed that from one side, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and just make sure that the seam is going in the same direction all the way across. So of course it isn't. So I'm going to go ahead and re-iron that a little bit before I get over to the frame. Another thing I'll do before I get there is measure and find the center point of both the top and bottom, because that's how I'm going to attach it to the frame with that center mark. I also have the center mark on the frame itself, on the leaders. Those are permanent markings on my leaders, so that I always know that the back is perfectly centered on the leaders in both positions, and I know that I don't have some kind of twerking going on as the quilt gets rolled up. Okay. And one other thing I probably will do before I go up, get it loaded, is take it back upstairs and just trim off the two edges. And the way that I'm going to do that, I'm going to take the top selvage and the bottom selvage, which are still intact. I'm leaving those on there because they're really great for pinning onto the leaders. I'm going to line those two edges up, and I'm going to line those up again with a fold, and I'll just keep folding that over and over until I can get the two edges under a ruler and just trim those two edges up. So that'll be a pretty easy process. If it doesn't lay flat, I'll know that I don't quite have it straight. But this is a handful of fabric. It looks like an octopus at this point. Believe it or not, once you get it folded, you will be able to tell if it's straight or not. I am going to take a little bit of time and do this over, but if it's straight, you'll be able to tell that it's nice and smooth. As that would be. And then you can just lay the ruler over it and get a clean edge. Laying one line of the ruler on these two straight edges and then straightening this up. But I'm going to go ahead and do it over again because it is a big piece, and then we'll get the center marked and we'll get it started on the frame. Another method to do the trimming is to fold the quilt in half, selvage on top of the selvage, and then fold it in half down the other way. So basically you're folding it in quarters. And then you can fold the edge that you need to trim so that it's on the outside. Fold the selvage edge down on top of itself as many times as you need to get that piece that you need to cut under the ruler. And so that's just another way of squaring it off. The nice part about that is while you have it folded in half, you can go ahead and make your markings on the selvage where the center is. So that's what I've done. We can go ahead and get that started. I'm going to trade the top out for the back. There are many things we do in life where we just kind of get comfortable with something and we stop trying new things. Could be music. Some people may have liked the 50s music and they just stopped listening to new music. It could have been dance music. That's kind of me. Electronic dance or something. Disco. It could be a hairstyle. You know, sometimes you go out and you see a woman with a hairstyle from the 70s or 90s, and you kind of chuckle to yourself because you remember those days. And the truth could be said also for ways of connecting quilts to the machine. I happen to like pinning. I know a lot of people like the red snappers and the zippers and other numerous methods of doing it. I just happen to like the pins. For me, it's pretty quick and they're certainly inexpensive, and when one bends I throw them away. But I've had this same set of pins without opening a new box for almost 3 years. These are just corsage pins. I get them on Amazon. They're just a couple dollars for a box of 100 or something, and they're about 2.5 or 3 inches long, and they're stiff, so they go through the selvage of the fabric very well, and they go through the canvas leader very well. Now you could do this loading from the back or from the front. It just depends on which way you're pulling the leader. I could have the leader going that way and stand in the front, but today I just happen to have it in the back. Well, I always have it in the back. It's just where I like to do it. Because I have to do the bottom part out there, I like to do the other side down here. So all I'm going to do is I have the center marking on my leader, and I have the center marking on my backing. I'm making sure that my backing is the pretty side facing down, and I have my seams going this way, the same way as the bars. And I'm just going to now match up the edge of the selvage with the edge of my leader, and I'm going to carefully pin as close to the top of both the leader and the selvage as I can. And you could either pin from the center out, pointing that way, and then pointing that way if you're one that likes to smooth. That way you won't get poked, but you have to be a little bit more ambidextrous to do that. I usually just pin all of mine from right to left. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on. I have the pins all the way across for the backing to my top leader. And as I've said before, I have put labels on my bars because sometimes I forget and call them the wrong thing. So this is a take-up bar, and this is my dead bar. The dead bar is what keeps the backing fabric, well, the entire quilt sandwich, at the right level so it doesn't bounce. It has to be low enough so that it doesn't bounce up, and it needs to be in contact with your sensor on the Bernina, and also not too high. So it's really like the height of almost between a dime and a business card is the correct length. So this is adjustable up and down, and sometimes if you're having trouble with the quilt sandwich bouncing, it's due to the height of this bar. But the quilt sandwich does have to pass underneath this, so that's something you need to pay attention to. Also, this bar also raises up and down, and sometimes you can look at that and see if it's interfering with the movement of your machine or the head of your machine. I have mine right now to get the maximum use out of the head of my machine, so I lowered it a little bit so the head of the machine can go a little bit further back. Now I'm going to show you these because I bought them, I used them. I know they're not currently available on their website, but in case you come across something similar, I think you should pick some up. These are leader clamps, and it's not regular PVC. It's kind of like a PVC, a lighter, thinner PVC, but they clamp onto the bars, and the reason I love them is because it helps keep the canvas taut as you're rolling it up, and I think that's a good thing. And they came from Quilters Apothecary. So they may have a different version of these. I saw at one point they had a version with a handle on them, like a canvas strap. I happen to like these, but what you would do as you're rolling up the canvas, you could roll the clamp with it, and it keeps the canvas nice and taut. So you're getting really nice tight wrap, and you're not getting loose roll, and it just helps keep everything nice and neat. The other thing you need to look at is how much of the leader you want to leave out, and that's going to depend a little bit later on when we get the design loaded, depending on whether it's a design board, a Panto, or a digital design. Where the edge of that's going to be, that's going to depend on where we put the start of the quilt at. So we'll wait until locking it down until later for that. So now I'm going to go to the other side and start doing the bottom side of the quilt. This is the backing still. I'm going to put the bottom of the backing on the backing bar. This is basically, I'm going to have all of the excess of the backing right here in between the two bars. Again, I have a little marking here denoting the center of the width. I have a red line on my leader denoting the center of my leader, just as I did on this one. And I'm going to line up those two markings. And then I'm going to start pinning across both ways. And once I get those two pinned, I'll put the clamps on here again like I did on the top. And then I'm going to go ahead and start rolling this up. Okay, I have my clamps on the front again. And again, I'm going to remind you, these were from Quilters Apothecary, but I don't believe they're on their website right now. So don't message us and ask where did I get them. They're from Quilters Apothecary, but I don't believe they have them. But if you do find them on there or find them somewhere else, I recommend you get them. You can see that my quilt is hanging down from the backing leader, the backing bar, and I have my clamps on there. And as I roll my clamps, I'm going to roll up. As I roll the bar, I'm going to roll the clamps so that I'm keeping that leader very tight. And I'm going to go all the way up until I get to the pins. That's where I can't roll anymore. And since we never quilt past here, I don't have to worry about these obstructing anything. Now when I get to the bottom of the quilt from quilting, I will have to release these, but that's a long way off. And now I'm just going to straighten the fabric out and start rolling up the quilt. And you have to keep in mind that the two edges are pinned all the way down on the top and bottom, but there really isn't any tension on all of the middle part of it. So it's likely that the two, as you go to the middle, it's going to pull in a little bit. You just want to try and keep it pulled out as much as you can, but it's never going to be completely even, or at least it never is for me. So I just roll it up slowly and keep smoothing it out. And I'm going to fix these two pins because I don't like them. You're just going to keep smoothing it out as you go, trying not to get any puckers until we have the whole thing rolled up nice and smooth. Now again, another thing you'll find is that everybody that quilts has their own level of tightness that they like to use. I probably quilt a little bit tighter than some people. That's going to be up to you. Just want to make sure that it's rolling up straight. So far it's rolling up really straight. One of the indicators you're going to get, I'm going to get two of them, are when my seams come up. They should go across the bar perfectly evenly. We'll see how well that happens. And you can see right here is my seam, and it's almost perfect. I'm going to keep forging ahead. Some people have a lot of patience for one aspect, while some people don't have the same patience for that. I know that some people will roll and re-roll and re-roll their quilt on the front and back bars. Unfortunately, I don't have the patience for that, and you can see here again the second seam just a little bit off, but I'm going to keep going because I know I can smooth my hand over this a little bit and it will smooth out some of that and tighten it. I know some people don't like to do this part, but just a little bit of smoothing for me works good. So now I'm going to measure again the piece of batting that I'm going to need, and I'm going to measure from one edge of the backing all the way over to the other, and I'm going to talk to you real quick about the thickness of batting. I know some of you beginners may have been getting batting from sources where they only carry like one thickness, so I just want to show you some of the options that are available. One of the battings that I have been using for a really long time is the Quilters Dream Cotton, and like I said earlier, sometimes you just get stuck using something. Now that doesn't mean it's the only one I use. Sometimes I'll buy batting when it's on sale somewhere, and I'll use the 80-20. Sometimes I use wool batting, but this is a really good 100% cotton, and with this you can quilt up to 8 inches apart. Now I know in today's society we often have our panther designs are much closer than 8 inches apart. I mean, 8 inches apart is almost like that. But this comes in many different sizes. There's craft, crib, throw, twin, double, queen, super queen, and king. But also there's 4 different thicknesses. There's request, which is the thinnest, and then there's a select, deluxe, and supreme. And the supreme is one of the ones, well, I like deluxe and supreme. And you can see I've got a request here, which would be good for just like a cool night, or maybe even a summer quilt. The request would be the thinnest of all. But the deluxe and supreme are the thickest, and they're the ones that I like to make for winter, and they also feel like almost like a weighted blanket because they're so thick. They also give a little bit more dimension to the quilting because the batting is thicker, and so it's going to show a lot more of that dimensional aspect to the quilting design. They also come in white and in this cream color. I always just get the natural because I don't traditionally do really bright white quilts. So that is just another consideration that you can get. I'm going to be using probably the deluxe or the supreme. I don't know which one I have upstairs. I've got 2 rolls upstairs. I kind of got lucky because I ordered a roll of the supreme, and they sent me a roll of deluxe instead. And when I called them back, they went ahead and gave me a really great deal if I kept the one I had and shipped me a new one. So I have both, but one of them is a larger roll. One's 109 and one's 120. So I'll see which one is which, and that's what I'm going to put on there. But I am going to use the thickest one that I have, just so the quilting shows up really good. So that is a little bit on batting. Have you been using rolls so long that I've had these batting in the package for probably, I don't know, 18 years now. I just keep them because. And then after I get the batting, we can go ahead and load this. My backing was 108 inches, so I actually cut the batting 107 because it always stretches a little bit. And this part really isn't necessary. I've laid the batting in place, but I'm going to curl it back, and I'm going to put a little bit of 505 temporary spray adhesive right along the top of my backing fabric, just like it smooths the batting in place. Kind of helps it hold it in place while I'm doing my first sew line there. Almost like an extra set of hands to keep everything smooth. This is totally not required, and I could understand if you were doing a business why you wouldn't want the added expense of this, but I'm not running a business. For me, it's worth eliminating the aggravation. So now when I sew a line across the top here, I shouldn't have any problems. And I am going to sew a line across the top here. I'm going to sew a line across there with basically the back of the head, with the back of the head of the machine running against the back of the bar after I roll the quilt up a little bit. and that's going to give me a straight line all the way across. Now I could turn on the IntelliQuilter and use the channel lock on there and do it that way. I also have channel locks that I bought for the Bernina, but I have taken those off. I took those off to mount one of the motors for the IQ. But I like to have that line across there, and it could be 2 or 3 inches down. It all depends on how much of the batting I roll up. But the point of that line, that sewn line for me, is gives me a way to put the top down, and I know that that line is straight. Because the head of the machine is sewn directly against the bar or with the channel locks on, I know it's a perfectly straight line. So when I line up the top of the quilt top with that and top stitch that in place with the basting stitch, I know it's going to be positioned correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done. I have my machine on, I have the machine threaded, I have my machine on a basting function. So I'm going to start in the middle of the quilt and work my way out. I've rolled up the quilt so that the top of the batting is already rolled under the dead bar. And I know that when the back of the machine hits these clamps, that it will pucker a little bit. So I'm going to try and move those out of the way. But I also can ignore that little bit of a bump when I get to putting the top down, if it really comes to that. So, basting function, I'm going to pull up my thread. I always pull up the thread so that it doesn't create a knot in the back. And I'm just resting the back of the machine on that back bar as I sew. So it's basically giving me a straight line. When I get all the way to the end, I'm going to tie a knot. And I'm just going to go across the back and across my head. So I've done 2 things for myself. I've secured the batting to the backing, and that straight line has given me a place to position the top of my quilt. I have a nice straight line all the way across the backing and batting, so I can know that when I lay my quilt top on there, it's not even the slightest bit at an angle, because we don't want the quilt getting rolled up at an angle like that. So I can go ahead and get the rest of this batting tucked under the machine. Because I want to find the center of the top and the center of the bottom, I want so I can mark it, put it in the center of the leaders. I'm going to go ahead and fold the quilt top in half. So I can find the center mark. And I don't need to make a full, iron or crease it or anything. But I'm going to use Miracle Chalk, the Miracle Chalk Chubby Crayon. Just make a little mark right here on this black fabric, and that's going to indicate where the center top is, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the bottom. This Miracle Chalk, just if you put an iron to it, it just completely vanishes. There's no chance of that ever coming back. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and make another line, and you can see how clearly that shows up. So that is the Miracle Chalk Chubby Crayon. It also comes in like a little box with the powder in it. And I think it also comes in a flat piece like a Taylor's chalk. So now I can go ahead and get this put on. There really is no top or bottom to this design. So I can just go ahead and get that center mark lined up to the center of my quilt here. And I'm going to get it approximately lined up to that straight line that we've sewn. I have the top of the quilt lined up approximately, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that back and give a light spray of the 505. I've got my center Miracle Chalk line there, ready to line up to my center line on the leader. I've got the top edge of the quilt right on my stitching line, and I can smooth this out. I can feel it lightly sticking to the batting, so there's no ruffling. So I know when I come across that with the basting stitch that we're going to get a nice smooth stitch. I'm even going to do some down this edge for my first basting down the edge. Now I can go ahead and pin the bottom of the top onto the bottom bar, and I'm always going to pin a quilt this size. I know some people like to float a quilt, and floating a quilt means after they get this top sewn on that they wouldn't connect the bottom to anything. They would just let the top piece float for the rest of the way as they roll it up, and they would just baste the sides as they go. I don't mind doing that if it's a little tiny wall quilt or something, but for a quilt this size, I want to go ahead and use all of the tension available that the long arm designers designed into the frame. They intentionally gave us that bar and the side clamps, so I'm going to use them. You can see my Miracle Chalk line here, and you can see my red line indicating the center of my leader. So I'm just going to line those two up on the edge, and then I'm just going to start pinning from the center out. And again, these are just corsage pins. I just order mine off of Amazon, but I've only had to order once because they very rarely bend. They're very kind of thick, so they withhold or withstand the constant use on the thick canvas over and over and over again. And I try and keep them as close to the edge of the leader as possible. And when we get close to the end of this quilt, we'll remove these and put a basting stitch to replace them, so we can go ahead and finish the quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this, and then we can roll this one up. You can see all of my little pins lined up like ducks in a row at the very edge of both the edge of the quilt and the very edge of the leader. And now I'm going to go ahead and start rolling up the quilt top and get it ready to quilt. Okay, I have my clamps on again. This is my top rail. My top rail pivots up for when I need to advance the quilt, or for when I'm attaching the quilt. Again, you may ask why I'm using these clamps, especially since we don't sell them. I use them because they work for me. I'm telling you about them because I use them all the time. So you are going to see them in the studio. I got them from Quilters Apothecary, but I don't know if they still carry them or not. You would have to contact them. The reason I'm telling you is because they're a great asset to keeping the leaders tight as you're rolling it up. And if Quilters Apothecary doesn't have them, if you ever see anything similar, I would certainly purchase them. I have a lot of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have at least 15 of them on right now. I probably have 20 of them in the studio. So if you see them, I recommend you get them. Like I said, I just advance the clamps. I roll them around and it keeps the leaders really tight. So I'm getting a good tight roll up on the leaders. Some of you may not know why I want that, but some of you who do, those who know, know. And I keep rolling until it gets all the way to the edge of the leader, and that's all the farther I need to go with it. And then I can start advancing the quilt. Now I'm going to pull the quilt, all the extra quilt forward so I can keep it straight. And then I'm just going to start rolling. I want to make sure we're not getting any little puckers. Let's see them here. Generally, if I can keep it feeding straight on the quilt here, then it's going to feed straight onto the bar. If I wasn't talking so much, I'd have it done. Now I don't want to tighten this up all the way because the bar has to drop down, so I have to give it room to do that. You can see how that would tighten that up, and then once I clamp it in place, it's going to tighten it even a little bit more. And I always have it a little bit puckery down here, but I don't worry about it because it's never made an impact on the quilt. By the time it gets up here, it's perfectly smooth, and it's in tension. So now I have tension on the top, tension on the backing here and tension on the top here, and then I have side tension clamps. These are the side clamps that came with the Bernina frame. It came with 2 of them, and I thought they were monstrously big when I got it, and also I thought they were really heavy to have 2 of these on the edge of the quilt. So I cut them off. I didn't like them, and I replaced them with these tarp clips that you can get from a big box do-it-yourself store. These are what you would use to hold down a tarp in place if you had it on the roof or were using it for a tent, and I just went ahead and tied those on. I also put 2 of my corsage pins on each location just to give the teeth something to grip onto, because even with this I found that they slipped out. So I just go ahead and put those in place. And you may also notice that I've got 3 instead of 2 because I purchased an extra rod for each side of my machine just so I could have more regular tension on the side. And these tighten up just the way that the old system did with the Bernina knobs, but instead they're mine. So now, for all intents and purposes, the quilt is ready to quilt. So now it's just a matter of deciding what method we're going to use. At this point, you could put stencils on here and use one of the Miracle Chalk to create designs with either a stencil or some other method. You could use our Tearaway product to put directly on top of the quilt. Tearaway is a single-use product that you would use the 505 to temporarily adhere to the top of the quilt. You would stitch through it on the design, and then you would tear it away at the end of the quilting process. We also have pantographs, which I'm going to show you how to load in a second, and we have the design boards as well as digital designs for quilting. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to load a panto on here for the quilt. But I'm going to have to clean up a little bit of my mess here first. I want to explain real quick why I add 7 inches to the width of the backing and batting. First of all, we connect the quilt to side tension. So I'm going to measure the edge of the quilt over to the edge of this clamp. And that is about an 1.75 inches from here to the end of the clamp. Now I'm going to remove that. From the edge of the my ruler table to the needle point here is 6.5 inches. So if you add 6.5 and 1.75, then you get 7.25. And so if the table was coming over and hit that clamp, you're going to get an abrupt mark on where the machine is quilting. So I don't always know that I'm going to have the ruler table on or off. This does come off, but as a matter of math, I just always add that space on there so that I don't always have to be thinking, because I don't always know if I'm going to come back and need the ruler for something. So that's why I add it. You can see that I have mine set up so that even if the ruler table is on, my machine can come all the way forward. You can see I can still come all the way forward, and that's because I've moved this bar forward to accommodate that. It only will go so far back because it hits the back bar, and it will only go so far forward because the back of the machine hits the back bar as well. So that's determining my design space. It has nothing to do with my front bar because I've moved that forward. So that's the whole reason for the extra width on the backing and batting. Now I'm going to go ahead to the back and show loading a couple different things. First, when I say that I'm going to put a large panto on, that means a large panto for what I can use. I only have pantos in the studio that would fit my machine. I know there are pantos that are out there that are too large and I wouldn't be able to get them to fit. The panto that I'm going to put on here is 10.5 inches. It says wide, but the width they're talking about is this way. All of our pantos are 144 inches long, and this is a 12-foot table, so I don't have to worry about that. I already have a panto loaded on here, so I'm going to go ahead and take that one off. As you can see, I have my Pantograph grids already loaded. The way that I have this on the table is with poster clips that run all the way across the length of the table, and I have those double stick tape to the table itself, so that all I have to do is lift up the clamp if I need to take the Pantograph grid off. But other than that, it just keeps the Pantograph grid centered on the table exactly where I need it. So all I need to do when I want to change my Pantograph is roll the old one off. So I'll go ahead and get this one rolled up and back in its sleeve, and then I can get the next one loaded on there. This particular design was created by Patricia Ritter. And the pictures here are not the size of the panto. That's just an illustration to give you an idea of what you're going to be seeing on the inside of the panto, of course. And what we like to do is have our start position on the left and have it going to the right, because most people learn to read left to right, whether it's writing or signage. Now that doesn't mean that you all have to sew that way the rest of your life. If you're comfortable doing your pantos right to left, by all means you can go ahead and do that, because the machine sews perfectly in both directions. We just recommend it for beginners because we know there's a comfort level with the mind operating in that way. We learn to read right to left or left to right. We read signs left to right. And so we know that there's a comfort level in reading the panto left to right as well. So we recommend those people starting would load their panto so that the start would be on the left and they would sew to the right as well. And so I'm going to go ahead and get this underneath the Pantograph grid and get it lined up with the edge of the quilt, and then I'll show you how that works. When I get the my needle, my hopping foot right to the edge of my quilt, I can go ahead and drop the foot down or the needle into the quilt. And now I'm going to move you to the back. This is a representation of where the edge of the machine is. So here's the start of my design. So, well, actually right here is, but it comes back. So this would be a little bit of an empty space, but that's okay, because remember the batting has up to 8 inches apart, and our binding would be sewn right across here, so I'm not worried about that at all. But this would be the start of my quilt, and I would line that up as close to the edge as I wanted, knowing that's my starting point and it's going to come back. This is a single row design, so you're going to sew this one time and then you're going to advance. This down here is to fill in the bottom, and in my case the very top of my quilt is exactly where the very edge of this echo is. So if I just filled this line, sewed this echo line in all the way across, even if I just jump from one piece to the other, it would be perfectly fine. Fill in the space, and that's how you realign, is by going from what you've just sewn, the furthest mark. You drop the needle in there and wait till the red dot came all the way down to here and pick up your needle and you're ready to sew again. The echo up here is for adjusting the quilt when you get to the bottom edge and you need to fill in. I use wet erase markers. You could draw a line here letting you know that this is the edge of the quilt. You could draw a line here if you wanted to show the top. You could also make any alterations you wanted to. For instance, if for some reason you didn't want to do these curly cues, you could go through the whole thing and just mark those curls out, or if it was a star or anything else that you wanted. I do use wet erase markers so that when you take the quilt off, it can't inadvertently wipe across the dry erase markers and get onto the quilt with that dry erase ink. The other thing I do at the other end of the quilt, I also mark the very edge the same way I did here, so you know where to stop, because you are going to be working behind the quilt. And whenever we talk about a panto, we're talking about being in the back of the machine. So when I say left to right, I'm talking about being in the back of the machine and sewing left to right. We don't sew pantos from the front, we sew pantos from the back. So if you're working on a panto, we recommend sewing left to right. You're going to be behind the machine. That's where the pantos are sewn. I know some people come up with weird ways of sewing pantos on the front. That's not how they're designed. They're designed for the back table. This is where we put them. And also please note that this panto and this pantograph grid are centered on the width of this table. We do not have them tucked all the way to the back. That way, as the take-up bar fills up with the quilt and batting, we don't have a problem with losing the ability to get to the bottom part of the design. By having this centered, we know that even if this rolls up really fat with double batting or a king-size quilt, we're always still going to be able to get to the bottom portion of this design. This is one of our design board sets, and you would need to buy enough of the design boards to go across the width of your quilt, so you'd have to determine that yourself, what you were sewing. And I'm going to be doing another video on doing a whole quilt with these coming up soon. Basically though, the O-rings connect the design boards together, and if I were going to do this, I would have taken my pantograph grid out of the clip and taken the design or the papers out, because I would duct tape this or masking tape it directly to the table, because you don't want this to slip. After we get this in place, you position the head, the start, just as you would for the other. So if the head of my machine is right on the edge of the quilt, I would have my laser dot right here at the edge of the starting point, and instead of using the laser dot, of course you're going to be using a stylus, and the stylus drops right into the groove of the and that's how you would sew. And so you just gently, when you start the machine, you gently move along the lines of the groove, and you get almost perfect stitching with that, because it's like training wheels, but also it gives you really perfect stitching designs when you're doing geometric designs as well. So these give you really beautiful renditions of a design. So this is another option for creating designs on a quilt. I don't know, I think this is Riptide, but I'm not sure. Pipeline. This particular design is called Pipeline. Some people only do these design boards because, as I said, you get a perfect representation of the design when you do these. I know some people ask the purpose of the pantograph grid. One thing, it protects the paper pantograph so you don't get anything on it, whether it's ink, it doesn't crinkle up, you don't spill anything on it. It also allows you to edit your design by marking on it. It gives you center lines, so you know that you've centered the pantograph and that it's even all the way across. So it's just a really great tool. It does come in 3 sizes, so you would need to buy the one that comes best fits your machine. And if you have any questions, you can contact the office. They could help you with that, because you want to make sure you get the right size, because there is a restocking fee on that. You'd only purchase it one time, and these do come up on sale, I think, twice a year. So that's something you could look forward to. Well, that about wraps this one up. We got the quilt top done and the backing sewn together. I believe this is a Jason Yenter fabric. The line of fabric was Decoupage, and the name of the quilt pattern was the Decoupage Kit. I marked it using the Miracle Chalk Chunky Crayon. That's available at Urban Elements. They also have like a tailor's chalk and one of the boxes that you can pound on the stencils for marking quilts also. The name of the design board was Pipeline, I believe. And I used Quilters Dream Cotton, and the clamps that you saw me use on the leaders, those were from Quilters Apothecary. I do not know if they still carry them, but you might want to keep an eye out if anybody else makes them. I find them invaluable. I use them every single time I quilt, so I'm in love with them. I have about 15 loaded on the machine right now. So did I use anything else? I can't think of anything else. Oh, the Pantograph grid. I've had a Pantograph grid on my machine ever since I've had a machine. I can't imagine not having one. I don't know what people do when they don't have one. I don't know how they adjust their pantograph. I don't know how they keep it straight. I don't know how they edit the top and bottom when they get to that. I don't know a lot of things about how they do that. So I've just always had one, and I find it invaluable. I know it's a little bit pricey, but you can get it on sale, and it's incredibly useful. Again, I like to use the wet erase markers so that it can't brush off onto a quilt when you're unloading it, because sometimes I unload from the back, and when you take the markings off, it has to be intentional with water. So I think those are all my things for today. I just want to let you know that you're all welcome here, all equally, beginners, intermediate, advanced, man, woman, child, everybody. You're all welcome here. I want to thank you for stopping by. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.